Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank, and over the next 60 minutes, Kimmy Checks, Marcus Grant, and Michael F. Florio will be joining me to talk about the top starts, the best sleepers. We'll be talking about all the injury news. We'll talk about fantasy heroes. We'll get you set up for the week one of the fantasy football season. And as a matter of fact, if you have any questions, hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. And if you're watching us on YouTube at youtube.com/NFL, you can check out Michael Florio. He's in the chat right now. You can ask him directly. He's good. We trust him. That's why he's not here. We trust him. And before I bring in Kimmy and Marcus, I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you to what could possibly be one of the weirdest week ones in NFL history. I feel great. I'm wearing a Christmas shirt. I feel like this is going to be a great time. But I think the biggest news on the field is what's happening in Tampa Bay, where one of the biggest names in football is now joining the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, of course, I'm talking about Leonard Fournette. And, well, I guess his quarterback, too. But Leonard Fournette, can we talk about, Leonard Fournette is going from Blake Bortles to Tom Brady, which is a lot like going from Blake Bortles to Tom Brady. I spent 3 hours trying to think of a better analogy, and I couldn't do it. And a lot of people, understandably, were not a big believer in Leonard Fournette this season in Jacksonville because Jay Gruden's the offensive coordinator, and they're like, he'll never catch 76 passes, which is true. But now he's with Bruce Arians, the guy who helped direct David Johnson, one of the most prolific fantasy football seasons in recent memory. And you don't think that he could go out there and get it again? And listen, this week he could end up with 27 rushing yards and a pair of touchdowns. I don't know. It's volatile, but I love it for the entire season. And I've talked long enough. Let's bring in Kimmy Checks and Marcus Grant. They've had to sit off stage listening to me rambling. I'm trying to break them with jokes. But Kimmy Checks, how you living this morning?
I'm living good. I didn't know that anyone could outdress you and put on a more obnoxious jacket, but then I showed up in my neon green. I'm so excited. Obviously, the season kicked off on Thursday. My Kansas City Chiefs, they won, which we all knew was going to happen. We saw some good rookie performances out of the guy I've been hyping all offseason, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And now we got a Sunday full of football. I'm ready to go. I'm excited. There's no more hypothetical chats about what we're going to see because now it's finally in front of our eyes. Football is back, and I'm happy to have my Sundays back with you two, gents.
Marcus, how you living?
I didn't know it was obnoxious jacket day, so excuse me. I'm gonna go get my. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually ready to go. Look, I've got my yerba mate tea. I've got my giant jug of water because it's important to stay hydrated. Everybody, remember that as the day goes along. But this is great because now we have actual football. Because my hot takeometer was actually running low because we didn't have any real football. So now by the end of the day, it should be filled up again, and I'll be ready to fire off hot takes come tomorrow morning.
Yeah, if you don't have a week 4 to hype up some rookie who's going to end up getting cut by the time they get down to 53, I don't know how we're living. But anyways, let's talk about the notable injuries and inactives here for a Sunday. And we start off right at the top. Kenny Golladay, somebody who has torched the Bears over the last couple of games, is going to be inactive this week with a hamstring injury. Alshon Jeffrey, also inactive. Miles Sanders. This news dropped on Saturday. Everybody rushed to the waiver wire to see if they had Boston Scott available and what they were going to do. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the good news is N'Keal Harry is going to be active this week for the New England Patriots. David Montgomery, this year's Christian McCaffrey, is going to be active. And you know what? Let's start in that game. But let's start with Kenny Golladay. Because as mentioned, he's had great success against the Chicago Bears. So, Kimmy, does that mean that we should start Marvin Jones this week?
You know what? I am not mad at starting Marvin Jones because this team is going to be looking to throw the ball early, and they're also going to be looking to throw the ball often, especially with their uncertain running back group. Also to note, Kenny Golladay got a lot of love this offseason. Fantasy fans were in love with him. Obviously, he's out. But to note, when Marvin Jones has been in the same lineup as Kenny Golladay, he has averaged more targets per game in the last 2 seasons. Plus, a wide receiver always likes to light up your favorite team, the Chicago Bears. So I do think Marvin Jones is a good option, and he's someone that people should be looking to start this Sunday.
Marcus, do you agree with that? Are we going Marvin Jones too?
Yeah, I would throw Marvin Jones in the lineup. I mean, I looked at what he did last year with Matthew Stafford. Both he and Golladay were on a pretty solid pace. So if Galladay's not there, a lot of those extra targets end up heading this way. I know the fantasy hipsters out there are hyping Quintez Cephas, but I think if you just want to play it safe, I think Marvin Jones is the way to go.
Yeah, and Bobby Quinn is an inactive for Chicago Bears, which could be good news for Matthew Stafford. Let's talk about Mike Evans, though. Now, this is a situation where they're playing a late afternoon game. We don't know if he's going to be inactive or not. He could be active. He could be on a pitch count. So what does that do for your lineup, Marcus?
Well, look, if Mike Evans is playing, I can't sit him, right? Because we just know the ability that he has. We know that the potential is there for him just to catch a couple of balls and somehow have a pretty good fantasy day. So that makes it hard for me to sit him. But I have this dilemma in a league, and so I've got Tyler Boyd on standby for one of those afternoon games against the Chargers. I mean, I think there are options in case you don't have Mike Evans. You can look at a guy, like a CeeDee Lamb perhaps in Dallas going against the Rams, Deontay Johnson going against the Giants on Monday night. But just be prepared to have that in your back pocket in the event we get word Mike Evans is a no-go.
And obviously not a bad idea to keep him in your flex spot just in case you want to get one of the late game running backs into the mix as well. Now, Kimmy, I've got to recuse myself from this David Montgomery chat for a moment because obviously the jacket, the hats, we all see what's going on. But what do you think this week, David Johnson going up against the Lions? Is he a pretty good start?
I like it. I mean, obviously you're biased because you're Chicago Bear fans, but I do like this pick, and I think that there's some opportunities for him to have a dynamic game. Now, there's always question of what was going to be the quarterback situation. Well, it's still your guy Mitch Trubisky, but I think that they've seen huge offensive improvements, and this could be an explosive game for David Montgomery. So that's my unbiased non-Chicago Bear take.
Well, I'll kind of jump in on that one, too, because I think today especially is a pretty good day to have Montgomery because I think this is going to be a fairly low-scoring game against the Detroit Lions, which means the Bears will stay in a fairly neutral game script, I think, for most of the game. In situations where they fall behind, I think Montgomery sort of gets taken out because then Tariq Cohen comes in to catch passes. But I think today you'll see a lot of David Montgomery all through 4 quarters.
Okudah is also out for the Detroit Lions if I read that correctly, and I like to believe that I did. So that could also factor into Mitch having a great game. But again, we won't talk about that. We'll talk about Miles Sanders because this was huge news on a Saturday. You wanted to be out. You wanted to be enjoying yourself. And all of a sudden, Miles Sanders doesn't make the trip. Boston Scott. We did give you a little bit of a cheat sheet here on Boston Scott yesterday on the NFL Fantasy Handle, and we had some big names that you could start over him. You could not start over him or whatever you're going to do. So, Kimmy, I'm going to ask you, is Boston Scott now a must start there in that Eagles backfield?
He absolutely is. And I think, anybody who's a fantasy fan, if you've looked at Twitter in the last 24 hours, it's Boston Scott, Boston Scott, Boston Scott. I know you guys are getting inundated with questions. And we have to remember, he was actually really good in the latter half of the season. Weeks 14 through 17, he ranked amongst the 9th running back, averaging a little under 21 fantasy points per game. He had 13 plus fantasy points in all 3 games with over 10 touches. So the last time that Boston Scott sat atop the Philadelphia Eagles depth chart, he recorded 23 total touches, 138 yards, and 3 touchdowns in Week 16's win over the New York Giants. So I definitely think he's a must start this week. He's trending upwards. There's huge opportunities with Sanders out. He's going to get all of that depth. So yeah, I'm into Boston Scott. But can we also just talk about the fact that the Eagles just have injury after injury after injury every single year? I pray that the team gets healthy.
No, you're absolutely correct, and that is one of the things that's always troubling. I think they have the talent to win the NFC East, but can they stay healthy? I think that'll be a big thing. And did want to point out too, also, if you want to check out the latest fantasy rankings, it's real easy. We're going to tell you to go to Michael F. Florio's Twitter handle. I know this is going to be a roundabout way, but listen, Florio does such a nice job with our fantasy rankings. I want you to go to his Twitter page, help him out. You can find it out, make your last minute decisions right there, because right now, this is everybody clear yourselves because it's going to be a sponsor read. Time now for 15 for 15 presented by Geico. We are going to be dishing out our top 15 starts of the week, and we will start off here with a quick look at my stardom quarterbacks for week 1. That's right. I do the stardom set'em column now, and you can see Jared Goff, Ben Roethlisberger, Cam Newton. Oh, I'm not afraid of Cam Newton. Jimmy Garoppolo. Oh, you know it. Kyler Murray. But Marcus, why don't you give us a quarterback that you like this week in fantasy?
Well, I'm going to go off board a little bit, and I'm going to say Dak Prescott going against the Los Angeles Rams, Sunday Night Football, the first game ever at brand new SoFi Stadium. I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game with 2 teams that will probably throw the football a lot when you look at all the pass-catching weapons on both sides here. Plus, if you're Dak Prescott, you got a couple of new weapons to try out. You got the rookie CeeDee Lamb. You've got Blake Jarwin, who's going to step in for Jason Witten. So I think Dak, who was the QB2 overall last year, I think he picks up sort of where he left off and has a good night against the Rams.
Marcus, I'm going to go with you and also go off board. And this is kind of a spicy one because of the matchup. But I am in on Drew Brees going up against Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, this is like an OG versus OG quarterback situation. But we cannot forget that Drew Brees is phenomenal. He's an incredible quarterback. In the last week 1 game versus Tampa Bay in 2018, he had 439 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, right? Like insane. He had the most fantasy points in season openers in the NFL since 2015. He averaged 7th amongst quarterbacks, a little under 21 fantasy points per game in 2019. And if we talk about a game where it's going to be points on points on points, it's going to be a huge contest. Tom Brady's going to go down the field with his new offensive weapon in Leonard Fournette, which you alluded to earlier. Drew Brees and the Saints just paid Alvin Kamara. They clearly have Michael Thomas. Now they have the addition of Emmanuel Sanders. It is going to be a shootout, and there's no better quarterback adjusted and equipped for that than Drew Brees.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, too. And I think that even though the Buccaneers played well at the end of last season, really getting into Todd Bowles' system, this just lends itself to being a high-scoring game. But let's take a look at the running backs right now. Here are my stardom running backs for Week 1. Aaron Jones, who I was not excited about for a full season. I like him here against the Minnesota Vikings because their defense is depleted. Kenyon Drake, Todd Gurley, Mark Ingram, Jonathan Taylor. But, Kimmy, I want to go back to you. Who is a running back that you like in Week 1?
You know, this again is a little spicy, but that is just my middle name, I guess. I guess I'm Kimmy Spicy Checks. But this week, I'm actually looking at Kareem Hunt. Now, I understand that the Baltimore Ravens allowed the fewest receptions to running backs in 2019 with 59, but it's a new season, it's a new year, and Kareem Hunt just got paid, so he's going to want to ball out. Now, you know, this is a brand new offense under Kevin Stefanski, and I want to see what Kareem Hunt will be able to do. Now, he averaged a little under 18 fantasy points per game since 2017, which is 8th amongst running backs. It's a new offense, it's a new year, and I think Kareem Hunt is going to ball out against the Ravens.
You know, that hot and spicy Chex Mix is actually pretty underrated, I will say that. You know, Chris Carson, we unveiled a brand new stat in Next Gen Stats this year called rush yards over expected. And Chris Carson was 5th in rush yards over expected last year, which is really just a fancy analytical way of saying he was good with the football in his hands. And I expect him to get it a lot against Atlanta. Seattle really didn't face a lot of 8-men in the box fronts because that's what happens when you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson. So I think that combined with Atlanta sort of breaking in a new defense this year, I think Chris Carson is going to rock in Week 1.
Yeah, Raheem Morris has taken over as the defensive coordinator for the Falcons after coaching the wide receivers over the last couple of years. That's true. And speaking of wide receivers, let's take a look at the Stardom Situm wide receivers for Week 1. Bobby Trees, DK Metcalf, T.Y. Hilton, DJ Chark, Deontay Johnson, Marcus, though, why don't you tell us who you like in Week 1?
Well, you got Bobby Trees at the top of that list. I'm going with his old college teammate, Juju Smith-Schuster, who was a disappointment last year. But, you know, I don't put it all on Juju. I mean, the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh was sort of a mess. And, you know, look, with Ben Roethlisberger, he is Juju Smith-Schuster. When it's not Ben Roethlisberger, he just sort of morphs into John Smith. And now this week, the offensive revenge tour, as I'm calling it, begins for the Steelers. They face a Giants defense that gave up the 2nd most touchdowns to wide receivers and the 2nd most fantasy points per game. So I think Juju and Ben Roethlisberger jump back and show everybody what they used to be.
I love that, but again, I'm going to go off board, and I am looking at Adam Thielen for the Minnesota Vikings. In case anybody forgot, Stephon Diggs was traded from Minnesota. He is now a Buffalo Bill, which means all of his targets are going to Adam Thielen. He is officially the man for Minnesota, and I like this week, and I think this is a huge opportunity for us to see what he's able to do. Now, an important note is that rookie Justin Jefferson missed 2 weeks of training camp. He was put on the COVID-19 list. That is not still his status. However, that just goes to show that Adam Thielen is a little bit healthier, and he's going to be the guy who's going to be getting, you know, the bulk of those targets and receptions for that team, especially with Stephon Diggs out. And we forget he's a very, very, very good wide receiver. And I don't think he's gotten enough hype. So I'm here to hype him up, get him in your lineup this week.
Yes, understandably. Okay, thank you very much. That was some good stuff. And that was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. And coming up, it's all about getting that Week 1 dub. So we've got a list of fantasy heroes that'll supercharge your lineups with great power comes great responsibility. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Cam Newton, a member of the New England Patriots, taking over for Tom Brady. The last time we had a 31-year-old veteran quarterback take over for a former Super Bowl champion. That was Steve Young, directing the San Francisco 49ers. He went on to be a fantasy superstar, won a couple of Super Bowls as well. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. Make sure that you send us your tweets. You can hit us up at NFL Fantasy, or if you're chatting along here, if you're watching us on YouTube, the chat function. That's Michael F. Florio. The F is for fantasy, and he is answering your questions. And speaking of answering questions, let's throw one up there right now, if we could, please. And Kimmy, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to lead off with you. It says, hi, folks. Should I stack Jimmy G with Kittle or start Cam Newton? What do you say, Kimmy?
Ooh, this is a good one. And you actually had some crazy stats about Jimmy G when he went up against the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, we talk about stacks on stacks on stacks, pancakes and money. It's always good to have a quarterback and receiver stack. I went to school with George Kittle. I love him. He's an incredible tight end. But I'm actually really excited to see what Cam Newton's going to do. So I'm rocking with Cam.
All right, DK Metcalf, Julian Edelman, or Marquise Hollywood Brown. Marcus, who would you play?
I think I'm going to go the Dark Knight, going DK Metcalf in this one. I've been saying all week, I think the Seahawks and Falcons are going to be one of the higher scoring games of the week. And we like concentrated passing games, and the Seahawks are sort of that. It's generally DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So I think I would go Metcalf in a situation where, he's got a quarterback he feels comfortable with and an offense that's going to throw the ball a bit.
All right, Chris wants to know, with Miles Sanders out, he has to choose between Zach Moss, Tariq Cohen, or James Robinson for his RB2. Now, obviously, James Robinson is going to be the starting running back. We don't quite know what his role is going to be. Zach Moss, we got an indication last season what kind of role he could have with this Bills offense because he's taking over for Frank Gore. He's a younger version, and we expect him to be the goal line back in this contest. So I would go with Zach Moss there, Chris, and then I would wish you good luck. Now it's time for Fantasy Heroes, some guys who will come in and save the day for you this week. But let's listen. We're looking for the Tim Drakes. We're looking for the Damian Waynes. We're looking for the sidekicks. We don't want the superstars. We know, but somebody who might not be a superstar who could come in and save the day. I'll kick it off, and I'm going to go with Todd Gurley, who at one point he's like the fallen superhero. He was like Jason Todd, who was at one point Robin, and then, he goes to the Lazarius bit, he breaks up. Now all of a sudden he's Red Hood. And this is a great opportunity for Todd Gurley to come back and reestablish himself as a fantasy hero, because last year, first of all, let me get this out of the way. He wasn't terrible last year. You just had really high expectations. And now he's going to a place where they're going to focus on him. I think that they're going to give him a lot of opportunities, especially early in the season. They didn't sign anybody else to really compete with them to split carries. So I think that Todd Gurley is going to be a great option. Kimmy, who is your pick?
I love that. I love the Todd Gurley pick. I'm really excited for him this season, and I do think he landed in a good spot with the Falcons. But this week, I'm looking at James Conner. I still have that DJ Shark
okay.
Shark thing stuck in my head. But James Conner, all right. They're going up against the New York Giants, and he's really good when he has Ben Roethlisberger as his starting quarterback. Big Ben is back and healthy, and I think the health is going to be a question for James Conner. That's always been something that has not been in his favor. He's missed 9 games in the last 2 seasons, but he's also finished as a top 20 running back in 5 of the 10 games that he played last season. So I think this is a new season. He's going to be healthy, and I'm pumped about him at RB.
Well, if we're going heroes, I'm going Calvin Ridley against the Seahawks. Did I mention I think it's going to be a high-scoring game? Look, Calvin Ridley to me is he's Miles Morales, right? I mean, he's the understudy to Peter Parker there, but in his own right, he's his own superhero. So I think Calvin Ridley steps up today. And look, teams threw on the Seahawks at an above-average rate last season. Ridley had a huge part of the target share and the air yard share. So I think he steps up and really explodes in week 1.
Yeah, but Miles, he's in his own world. He's not in that. Peter Parker is gone, so he's actually his own. Whatever. We're getting too into the minutia. Let's talk a little bit about AJ Brown, because in a number of drafts during this the last couple of weeks, for whatever reason, I noticed AJ Brown just falling down the draft boards, and I don't quite understand it. I know there might be some pessimism that the Titans might not be able to recapture the magic they had last season, because let's be perfectly truthful, this was a miracle run to get to 9 wins. And still, though, we loved AJ Brown coming into last season. He is one of the most exciting young pass catchers in the game, and the matchup against the Broncos is decent. They did get rid of Chris Harris Jr., but they brought in AJ Bouye, so I still think it's a tough-ish, it's tough adjace, but I still think that A.J. Brown can come through for you this week on Monday Night Football. And I guess that's going to wrap up our fantasy heroes. And as a matter of fact, coming up, should you expect some Gronk spikes today in New Orleans? We'll tell you if number 87 made our list of tight end starts, plus our favorite sleepers for week 1. Guess what? That's coming up next. There he is, Josh Allen, throwing the ball to the recently acquired Stephon Diggs. Can you dig it? You know, it's funny. As a Bears fan, I'm not upset about this. Very happy to see him in Buffalo now. And Josh Allen, who last year was a pretty decent fantasy quarterback, now has another good receiver because we're all sleeping on John Brown, or we're not. We know what we're talking about, but a lot of you are sleeping on John Brown. Well, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. We just saw the quarterback, wide receiver. Let's talk about tight ends because I want to talk about Rob Gronkowski. He is down there in Tampa Bay. He followed Tom Brady after a year where he went out. He won the 24/7 title for the WWE. Now he's back playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Kimmy, let me ask you, are we starting him today?
No, we're not starting Rob Gronkowski. And maybe that's just crazy. That's a boomer take. You know, I do think that Tom Brady is going, to want to try to get the ball to his friends. But, I think his health is going to be in question. He hasn't played a full football game in over a year. Also not having preseason games. That's a little bit tricky. So I'm going to wait on Gronk and see what he's going to be able to do. But they still got Cameron Brate and O.J. Howard down there as tight ends.
I would say with Gronk, some of it may depend on what happens with Mike Evans. I'm not a huge, I don't have a lot of excitement about Gronk this week. But if Mike Evans isn't playing for the Bucs, then I think there's a chance for him to get some more targets. Especially because that's the one guy we know that Tom Brady has familiarity with in this offense. And so I think when things down, we may see him go back in 87's direction.
Yeah, it just seems like an opportunity to kind of prove a point. And it goes back to what I was talking about Leonard Fournette too. It's just like, they brought in these guys, and it figures that they're going to go to them. They're going to ignore the guys who've been there, like Chris Godwin. Like, come on. But in any event, Gronk probably not going to start for us. If you had Travis Kelce on Thursday night, you're very happy with that. George Kittle. Kimmy was talking about him earlier in the show, what a great start he is this week. But who are some of the other great tight end starts not named George Kittle on Sunday? Marcus, why don't you kick this off?
If you've been watching me all week, you probably know what I'm going to say here. So I'm going to just say it anyway. Hayden Hurst, who I have been waving the flag for a while now, but I think he gets off to a really good start this week. Seattle last year really struggled when it came to covering tight ends. They gave up the third most receptions, the second most yards, and the second most fantasy points per game to the position. So I don't expect that they have gotten markedly better right now. And with so many weapons in that Atlanta passing game to have to deal with, I think that's going to open some things up for Hurst, especially when the Falcons get in the red zone and down near the goal line.
I love that, and I'm all in on Hayden Hurst. Actually, thanks to your advice, I picked him up in a few leagues of my own, but I am targeting Noah Fant. He's a good friend of mine, and no, I'm not biased. I just think he is going to be a beast of a tight end this season. He had a great rookie season last year, right? He had 562 receiving yards, which is the most for a rookie tight end in franchise history, and it's year two. He's created a rapport and a relationship with Drew Lock. I think they're going to exploit that, and he's going to be a sneaky start at tight end, and someone people are going to be happy if they grabbed him on his roster.
Especially with Cortland Sutton battling an injury as well, Noah Fant could be a great start this week. And, of course, I'm going to go with Blake Jarwin. And anytime you get a bunch of fantasy enthusiasts, so-called experts together, we're like comics where we will sit here and try to promote somebody who's unheard of, like, oh no, this guy's so funny, you got to hear him or whatever, or anything like that. It's like a hipster type thing, a point of pride. And I think a lot of us were promoting Blake Jarwin because last season, Jason Witten had a lot of red zone opportunities. We are hoping that is going to translate this week or this year into Blake Jarwin. So we'll be starting him. But those guys are locked in. But I mentioned injuries a moment ago. And that means it's time now for fantasy insurance presented by Geico. And here are some of our top sleepers for week one. Somebody, if you're already scrambling and trying to hit the waiver wire, Kimmy, who should we be looking for?
I'm going to say a name that I think a lot of people are immediately going to have to grab their phone and go look up, because when I said this name to our producer, he was like, who exactly is this? I'm talking about James Robinson with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, if you don't know that name, it's because he was an undrafted free agent who rushed for over 4,400 yards and 44 touchdowns while at Illinois State. So that means he's not that bad of a player. Now, why do I like this? Because he's available in 99% of NFL.com leagues. Leonard Fournette is out. We talked about him. He's in Tampa Bay. And they don't have a lot of depth at the running back position. So I think this is someone who is a deep sleeper, but they're going to need help on that offense. And he's someone who could step up to the plate.
And you can't count out those Illinois State Redbirds. I'm looking at CeeDee Lamb with the Dallas Cowboys, and I talked about Dak Prescott a little bit earlier and how I think he's going to have a really big game against the Rams tonight. The one thing, though, is Jalen Ramsey is probably going to be locked up on Amari Cooper. I know, Rank, you said you have sort of stayed away from Cooper here in week 1. Michael Gallup is going to get some attention. So I think there's a chance for CeeDee Lamb to really get going. I mean, you mentioned Blake Jarwin as another guy that could get going for this Cowboys offense because the Rams are going to pay attention to those wide receivers. So I think the rookie can make an impact. I wouldn't be surprised if he scored a touchdown tonight.
We love all the offensive stalwarts from that game with the Cowboys and Rams. Oh, sorry, not you, Amari Cooper, but everybody else looks good. In another game, you know, you guys went with rookies. I'm gonna go with an older guy. I'm gonna go with a veteran. I'm gonna go with Deshaun Jackson. You know, anytime it's week 1 and you're going up against the Washington football team, you gotta start Deshaun Jackson. And I love how, listen, we just pull up the videos right there. Like, this was his one game last season where he was absolutely torching those guys. And as a matter of fact, you might not remember this, he once played for the FT, which means this is a revenge game. So if you have an opportunity, you need to go pick up a wide receiver. Deshaun Jackson should be the first stop that you are making. And that was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. Coming up next, we're diving into some burning questions for week 1. Is Brady going to ball out for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Will Nuke Hopkins light it up in his Cardinals debut? NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico rolls on. There he is, Aaron Rodgers, getting ready for week 1. Let's see if he shakes hands with Jordan Love. That's right. The Green Bay Packers were on the cusp of the Super Bowl last season, and they thought, hey, let's trade up for our quarterback's replacement. I don't know if that strategy will end up working out for them this year or not. I'm just saying. Anyways, here are the stardom defenses and special teams coming into this week. The Steelers, and you know what? The Packers, the last time they faced the Minnesota Vikings in week 16, they had 5 sacks against Kirk Cousins. It was terrible. They were haranguing him. It was the kind of thing that you would feel bad about for that quarterback if that quarterback was not Kirk Cousins. Instead, we delighted because it was funny. And the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's come back. You can read. I don't need to voice all these for you. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And we're going to talk some burning questions, some things that might be on your mind as we head into week 1 in earnest here on Sunday morning. And here's the thing. Let me lead off with you. Tom Brady, Drew Brees, which quarterback is going to have more points in week 1?
It's going to be Drew Brees. I talked about him earlier. I said that's the guy that I'm going to be starting at quarterback. And again, this is going to be a shootout. It's going to be a high-scoring game. Both have dynamic offenses, but I really do think it's Drew Brees. Plus, I've been to the Superdome. Though there will not be any fans in New Orleans, there is something very voodoo-esque. There's a whole different spirit there. And Drew Brees, he said during the media availability last week, he said, I feel like I'm living on borrowed time, so now I'm ready to let loose the cannon. That is his arm. And he's going to want to ball out and show that he is the number one quarterback.
Yeah, I think I'm going to double down on that and say Drew Brees as well, just because, look, the one thing that we have talked about a lot this offseason is the lack of practice time and the fact that there were no preseason games. And so Brady is in a new offense. He's got new teammates. They're really talented, no doubt about it. But Drew Brees has equally talented teammates, but he has a familiarity with them. And so I think not having that practice time shouldn't be as impactful for him as it might be for Brady in week one.
You know what? The one thing, though, I'm trying to figure out is we know what Sean Payton's going to do, but what is Bruce Arians thinking this week? Because I could certainly see a situation where Tom Brady has a good game, but Leonard Fournette scores a pair of touchdowns, Ronald Jones scores a touchdown, or you know what? They just go YOLO, and Tom Brady has 6 touchdowns. So I know that's not answering any question, but I think that the biggest, but it will be interesting to see what Tom Brady does. I think it's going to be probably more towards the latter in those statements. And another quarterback who's changing teams is Cam Newton, the man who was replacing Tom Brady. Marcus, I've been pretty vocal about how I feel about Cam Newton. How do you feel this season?
I think he's going to have a great season. Now, week one, I'm very curious to see how he sort of gets into things. I know Julian Edelman has been banged up a little bit, but he should go, I believe, for the Patriots this week. I think Cam is set up to be very successful, especially if he gets back to running the football. We know when he's healthy and at his best, this is a guy that is a top 3, top 5 quarterback. Plus, I don't know if you've seen on social media the outfit he was wearing today. It is a Cam Newton classic, the bright yellow suit, the hat, the shoes that say BAM on the front. Just based on his attire alone, he's set up to be a QB1 this week.
I love that. And, I'm really excited for this Cam Newton performance along with New England. There's always been some question on, is Cam Newton a good teammate? Is he a good quarterback? We need to stop having that conversation. This is an incredible offense, an incredible team for him to be joining. He's built rapport with his teammates. He talked about he's so incredibly excited to have Julian Edelman as a wide receiver. He said he's one of the best wide receivers he's ever played with in football. So this is an exciting time for Cam Newton and an exciting time for the Patriots. And I really do think he could be their new QB with Tom Brady out.
Yeah, and you talk about being a good teammate. He's already been selected as one of the captains for the New England Patriots this season. Although when he was talking about Julian Edelman, I still wish that Steve Smith Sr., was still on Twitter just so we could get his reaction on that. But you know what? Maybe next time we see him, we'll just have to ask him how he feels about that. And speaking of wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins is joining the Arizona Cardinals, obviously. And here's my thing. On Thursday night, Bill O'Brien was intent on showing the world that the David Johnson trade is going to work out in their favor. What do you think about Cliff Kingsbury, Marcus? Do you think that he's going to overfeed DeAndre Hopkins in week one?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they're going to let the flow of the game sort of come to Nuke. I think the way things are going to work out, he's going to see plenty of opportunity there. But I do think that Kyler Murray, Cliff Kingsbury, they're going to spread the football around. I mean, I know they have big expectations for Christian Kirk. Larry Fitzgerald is still there in what could be his final go-around in the NFL. Kenyon Drake is going to get some targets as well. So I don't think that the Cardinals are going to force feed it. Look, they have nothing to prove, right? They feel like they won this thing anyway, straight up. They didn't even give up a first-round pick for Nuke Hopkins, so I don't expect them to just force feed him the ball just because.
Yeah, what do you think, Kimmy?
I love DeAndre Hopkins, and I know, later in the show I'm going to talk about Kyler Murray. I think it's going to be incredibly exciting to see this dynamic and see what happens with DeAndre Hopkins in this offense. Obviously, as Marcus noted, they do have other receivers, and they have players who they want to feed and they want to get the ball to. You just don't want to give it to the new guy on the block. You want to make them earn it. But this is an exciting time for DeAndre Hopkins. He's really built a rapport with Kyler Murray. They've also built a friendship. So I think it's going to be exciting to see what these two can do in a dynamic offense that's already incredibly loaded.
Yeah, I'm always waiting to see if they're playing Madden together or any other sort of video games, because that's how you really bond with a person. So those were the burning questions for week one. Let's now get into some, flex starts. And Marcus, Who do you got?
I'm going Raheem Mostert, and I really was big on Raheem Mostert going into the week anyway against the Arizona Cardinals defense. This was a run defense last year, excuse me, that ranked 24th against running backs, and Mostert expected to be the lead back there in San Francisco. Now there's word that Tevin Coleman may not play. I know there's worries and concerns about the air quality up there in the Bay Area with this game today and with some other underlying health issues for Coleman. He may not be on the field, and if that's the case, I expect a little bit of a bigger workload for Mostert in week 1.
I love that. Now, you guys, this is, again, another spicy checks take because we keep talking about Leonard Fournette, but let's not forget about Ronald Jones. And maybe I'm just saying this because I have a ton of shares of him in my own fantasy leagues, and I'm just being biased. But he's going up against the New Orleans Saints. But on the Buccaneers depth chart, he is listed as a running back 1. LaShawn McCoy is RB2, and Leonard Fournette is RB3, right? So we need to give Ronald Jones his attention in his due time. In the Tom Brady-run Patriots, they had over 70 rushing touchdowns over the last 4 seasons, which is tied for the 3rd most in the NFL. So I do think he could see some, red zone snaps and get the ball into the end zone. I'm excited on Ronald Jones, and I don't want the Leonard Fournette hype to shy away from that. So he's someone I am excited at for a flex start this week.
I can agree with that, Kimmy. I want the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans to know, in particular the Goon Squad. I like Ronald Jones. Please leave me alone. I'm not besmirching him. I'm also not going to besmirch Jonathan Taylor. I think that anybody in the offseason, before everything happened where Clyde Edwards-Helaire had the clear pathway to being the top rookie running back this season, everybody was in on Jonathan Taylor. Everything that he's got working in his favor. He's a good running back out of the back. He can catch the ball. That's the one thing that I think people are not giving him enough credit for. And he's running behind one of the best offensive lines in football. So I know if you were sitting there on Thursday night and you watch Clyde Edwards-Helaire, realize rookies can come in and still make an impact, especially at the running back position. But guess what? Up next, it is Sunday FUNDAY, everybody. Woo-hoo! Oh my gosh. What? Anyways, I guess, are we bumping now, Hytham? I'm sorry. All right, what are we doing? Our top scorers, our top starts. I'm sorry, I ruined these fan questions. Our predictions for week 1, plus some starts you're going to want to throw on our bench. I am so sorry to the fan tweets I didn't get to, but we'll get them up here next in our next segment. Time now for 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. At first, here is Lamar Jackson walking onto the field, getting ready to go, the MVP of last season. And now, time now for 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. Here are some of the notable actives and inactives coming into the week. Kenny Golladay is inactive against the Chicago Bears, as is Alshon Jeffrey. Miles Sanders is out, which means it's Boston Scott season, and N'Keal Harry will be active for the New England Patriots today, as will David Montgomery, a fantasy disappointment for a lot of you, including me, last season. And that was 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. And I would like to take this opportunity to point out who is joining the show right now, Michael F. Florio, who has been answering questions. Hey, Michael, welcome to Sunday.
Thank you. Week 1, I'm so excited.
As you should be. Now, you are answering questions on YouTube and probably on Twitter and all that good stuff. What were some of the hot names? Who were people asking about this morning? Who's on everybody's mind?
Yeah, the player that I got the most questions about this morning was easily Boston Scott. A lot of people asking between him if they should be flexing him or him and their RB2s. A lot of the questions were like Scott or Devin Singletary, Scott or Kareem Hunt, Scott or Jonathan Taylor. And I think I would use Boston Scott over all of those guys. Some people were also asking like Scott or Chris Carson. There, I think, though, I would go with Chris Carson.
Boston Scott or Christian McCaffrey? Where are we going?
That's a really tough one, but I think I'm going to stick with Christian McCaffrey.
Okay, I just want to know. Yeah, I think, though, isn't it one of the things, like, he is the solo back there for the Philadelphia Eagles, so it makes sense.
Yeah, I think he is an RB2 in week 1 now that Miles Sanders is out.
All right. Well, let's talk about high scores. Who's going to be the high scorers for week 1? We won't be counting the Thursday night football guys. You can't cheat or do anything like that. But, Kimmy, who are you going with?
It is going to be Kyler Murray, and he is going to look to do exactly what he did to the San Francisco 49ers the last time they played in 2019. Now, when they did play in 2019, he had just under 25 fantasy points, which is the second most by any quarterback versus the 49ers. Now, the 49ers are allowing the most points to quarterbacks in the NFL in weeks 9 through 17. I talked about him earlier, but DeAndre Hopkins is now a part of that offense, which means Kyler Murray is going to be throwing dimes on dimes on dimes. With DeAndre Hopkins in that offense. D-Hop was top 3 in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns in the NFL, which means all good things for Kyler Murray to get the ball to that guy. So I think he's going to be one of the top scorers. He actually will be the top scorer this week.
We've talked a lot about quarterbacks, either in new situations or trying to figure out what they're going to do. How about one who's coming back to a situation he missed pretty much all of last year, and that was Ben Roethlisberger. The Steelers, I think they're going to be back offensively after kind of struggling, especially in the passing game last year, and they start with a great matchup against the New York Football Giants. Giants ranked 25th against fantasy quarterbacks last year. A lot of it's because they just didn't get pressure on the passer, 8th lowest QB pressure rate in the league. So I think Ben steps up in a big way. I like Juju Smith-Schuster, as I mentioned earlier, and I think Big Ben kind of helps out with some big numbers today. Or Monday, I guess.
Florio, who you got?
I like Russell Wilson this week going up against the Atlanta Falcons. I think that has the potential to be one of the higher scoring games of the week. And we're coming into week 1 with Chris Carson. We're still not sure how much that hip is going to hold up, if he's going to be able to have the full workload right off the bat. So I think in what could be a potential shootout, we're getting even more deep shots than normal out of Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And we know all the fantasy points that he can also give us with his legs. I like Russ to go off in week 1.
I'm going to be looking at Lamar Jackson this week. I know it seems weird that we're going through these shows and we're not spending a lot of time talking about him, but he is such for somebody who was the leading scorer last year. It's hard to believe that he's still underrated because they're like, well, he's not gonna run as much this year, and you're like, that's fine. He still led the NFL with 36 touchdown passes last season, and now that Marquise Hollywood Brown is healthy and ready to go, there's an opportunity for him to be even better. So listen, I'm going to take the chalk way out. I'm going to take the easy way out, and I'm going to go with Lamar Jackson. And let's go to something else that has been a Sunday tradition dating all the way back to last year. It's time for Sunday FUNDAY! Woo-hoo! These are the players who are going to be popping off, non-quarterbacks who are going to score more than 25 points this week. Marcus, You can lead us off.
I'm going to go with Austin Eckler. And I know a lot of us loved Eckler coming into this year. It's amazing to think that in a lot of drafts he slipped to the second round because I think he's got some serious, maybe top 5 potential. His ceiling is kind of in the top 5 there. This isn't so much based on the matchup because last year the Bengals were okay when it came to stopping fantasy running backs, but this is about the potential volume. He's going to get the ball a lot in this offense, especially with Tyrod Taylor at the quarterback spot. So I just think in terms of the number of touches he can get and what he can do with that, especially if he's efficient near the goal line, it's going to be a big week for him.
Who do you got, Florio?
I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs against the Carolina Panthers this week. The Panthers last year allowed by far the most fantasy points to running backs. They allowed 30 touchdowns to running backs. No one else allowed more than 22. Plus, they lost some pieces on defense. And my only concern with Josh Jacobs coming into the year was his involvement in the passing game. But this is a game where I think that it'll be close, or the Raiders could even be playing with the lead. I would not be surprised at all to see Josh Jacobs go for 100 and a touchdown this week, maybe even 2.
Quit trying to denigrate Josh Jacobs. Everybody wants to question his pass. He can catch the ball. Like, everybody leave him alone. He's going to be good. Kimmy, who is your Sunday FUNDAY player?
Speaking of someone who's good, it's the best tight end in the NFL right now, and it's not Travis Kelce, because he already played on Thursday. It is none other than George Kittle. That was like my wrestler voice, because I know he likes wrestling, you like wrestling. It's George Kittle. He's going up against the Arizona Cardinals, and he is going to ball out. Now, this is the safest option in this offense, and he's no stranger to the competition. Now, the Cardinals allowed 19 fantasy points per game to tight ends in 2019, which is the most in the NFL. And speaking of most in the NFL, it's George Kittle. He was the second among all fantasy tight ends, just under 16 fantasy points per game. He is Jimmy G's guy. He's the guy who he's going to target. And, you know, beyond just his pure receiving talent, he has strength. If we think back to that Saints game last season, that wild game between the Saints and the 49ers, and George Kittle literally drug multiple defenders with him to get the ball across the goal line. And he's going to do that against the Cardinals today. I'm excited. I'm all in on George Kittle, and he is going to stack up all those fantasy points.
Dropping a GKO on the Arizona Cardinals. I love all of those picks. I love all of those players. I'm going to go with Aaron Jones, a player I might not necessarily like. I'm sure he's a nice young man, but he plays for the Green Bay Packers, and it pains me to tell you that he's going to have a monster game this week against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I've been worried that Aaron Jones is not going to be able to get those 19 touchdowns he had last season. Actually, I'm not worried about it at all. It's not happening. But in week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings, against a team that he played really well against last year, I expect him to do it again. In fact, the Vikings have lost a couple of big names, including Everson Griffin, off that defense. They're like when you see, I don't know, Jean-Claude Van Damme. You're like, hey, weren't you big like 2 decades ago? That's how I feel about the Vikings defense. So don't be scared to go up against Minnesota this year, and don't be scared about getting Aaron Jones into your lineups. And you know, in the previous block, I kind of rolled through 3 fan tweets, and I felt terrible about it, and I want to make good on it now. So can we roll those, Hytham? Would that be cool? Just they want their moment in the sun. And Kimmy, I will start off with you. This Cody needs to pick one. Gordon, Lindsey, Connor, full point PPR. Who are you going with?
I'm going with James Conner. Now, Melvin Gordon, you know, there's been some injury concern there, so I'm going with Conner. Again, I hyped him earlier. I said he's a guy who I think we're kind of sleeping on, so let's give him a chance. Big Ben's healthy. James Conner is healthy. Let's see him ball out today.
All right, let's see the next one. Benjamin wants to know Le'Veon Bell or Marquise Hollywood Brown in the flex. This is a PPR league. Marcus, who are you starting?
I mean, I know Hollywood Brown's kind of a trendy pick, but I'm still going Le'Veon Bell because as a running back, it's easier to get him the football as both a runner and a receiver. You're talking PPR, so I just think more touches are coming his way. And look, having the football in your hands is the lifeblood of fantasy success.
The neurotic guru wants to know, Michael, I have this unsettling feeling that Rivers is going to torch Jacksonville today. Is there any planet where it would be okay to start him over Josh Allen?
I get that feeling. I would be going with Josh Allen still this week. Rivers, I would not be surprised if the Colts run the ball all over Jacksonville this week. Rivers isn't going to add any points with his legs, so I'm going with Josh Allen there. I think he's the safer play and the higher upside of the two.
Yeah, maybe on Earth 2, Phillip Rivers is, you know, a 3-time Super Bowl champion for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's a great start this week. But I think that on this current Earth, that we all are on, I would go with Josh Allen as well. But you know what? Phillip Rivers is a big star in the world of football. Who are some of the bigger stars in fantasy football that you might be worried about this week? And Flora, I'll go back to you. Who is somebody you might be having some concerns about?
I would be worried about Amari Cooper this week. They played the Rams at the end of last season after they acquired Jalen Ramsey, and Amari Cooper was held to less than 3 fantasy points. Him and Michael Gallup combined were held to under 5. So I think that might be a similar recipe how the Rams defense looks to take out Cooper and Gallup and have them be beat by CeeDee Lamb and Blake Jarwin. So I'm a little bit weary about using Amari Cooper in week 1.
I agree, and that's a good pick, Florio. But I want to talk about Le'Veon Bell because I know I may be contradicting what Marcus just said, but I'm a little bit worried about him going up against Buffalo. Now, in 2019, he's coming off of career low numbers, right? 3 yards for rushing, 16 yards rushing per game in 2019, and he finished as a top 5 running back 0 times in 2019. So just because of that, I'm a little bit concerned about starting him. We didn't get to see him in any preseason games or up close at training camp. So this is just a guy going up against Buffalo, which got some really good defensive additions. They got a defensive end named AJ Espinosa. So I don't know. I'm a little bit worried about Lev Bell today.
Hey, it's cool to disagree. We can do that. We're free to do that here, although he may or may not have hyped up Machu Picchu with Maurice Jones-Drew. I mean, who's really to say at this point? A guy that I'm worried about is Nick Chubb this week against the Baltimore Ravens. And, he was hot and cold in his 2 games against Baltimore last year. Early in the season with no Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb had his best game of the fantasy season. Then late in the year with Kareem Hunt, he had his worst game of the fantasy season. Now he's going into this one with Kareem Hunt, expected to split time in the backfield. And I think if this becomes a high-scoring game, which it very well could be, I think we see more of Kareem Hunt getting targets as the Browns have to go to the passing game.
It might be high scoring for the Baltimore Ravens. I don't know if the Browns will be able to keep up, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not thrilled about starting OBJ this week. As a matter of fact, I did bench him in one of my leagues, and one of the reasons is that, last year Odell Beckham Jr. did not have some great games against the Baltimore Ravens. He's going to be locked in with Marlon Humphrey, and I think that when you look at how good this Ravens defense is, and I know the Browns were one of 2 teams that beat them last year, I think it's wise to leave Odell Beckham Jr. on the bench, even though I love him as a player this season. All right, let's go back, take a look at some more fan tweets if we can, and try to get to as many of these as possible. And the first question, Marcus, I'll start with you. Should I start Carson Wentz or Gardner Minshew?
I am all on the Wentz wagon this year. I think he's going to have a huge season, and I think it starts today against the Washington FT.
All right. Is there another one? Here we go. Hooper, Jarwin. Who we going, Florio?
I would be actually going with Blake Jarwin this week. Hooper has such a bad matchup for tight ends. The Ravens were great against him last year. It's his first game with a new team. I would actually be rolling with Blake Jarwin in that position.
All right, next tweets. Scary Terry, DJ Chark and half point PPR. Kimmy, James needs some help.
Ooh, this is a good one because both Chark and McLaurin are presumably the only offensive, real weapons on either of those teams. But I'm all in on Scary Terry. I've been hyping him all season. But regardless, I think those are 2 good options. All right.
Do we have one more? We do. Full point PPR, Kareem Hunt or Jamison Crowder. You know what? I will take this one if you guys don't mind. Kareem Hunt, for all the reasons that Marcus was laying out, that if this game gets into a position where the Browns have to throw the football to get back into it, Kareem Hunt is going to be the featured back there. And so there you go. Do we have time for bold predictions? Is that what we're doing? Florio, bold prediction, go.
I just said I was scared about Amari Cooper. I think his teammate, rookie CeeDee Lamb, catches not 1 but 2 touchdowns in week 1. The Rams last season struggled against the slot. They allowed the 3rd most touchdowns to players in the slot. I think it is a great spot for CeeDee Lamb to make a big impact in his first game.
Marcus, go.
Josh Jacobs outscores Christian McCaffrey. Last year, the Panthers gave up 31 rushing touchdowns, far and away the most of any defense in the league.
Kimmy.
I'm going all in on the rookie. Jonathan Taylor is going to usurp Marlon Mack in carries, targets, and fantasy points. Mark my words. He's going to pull a Clyde Edwards-Helaire and just blow up the spot.
I'm going to go with DJ Chark being the top receiver in fantasy football because they're going to have to throw the ball an awful lot. Want to thank everybody. Thank you for watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico.